When I start going in a moment, I'm going to put everybody on mute just to keep folks quiet and hopefully keep any problem people out. The chat feature, I will not be seeing any questions posed in the chat while I'm talking, but I will come back to them afterwards. If there's anything super egregious or anything I'm making a mistake on, please put it in there and Carol will come in and tell me. I know we have at least two new folks on with us that are fans of the 1939 Golden Gate International Exhibition. Anne is one of the members of the Treasure Island Museum up there. There's no pressure. When these people know more in their little finger than you could know in the whole thing, I'll find out how many mistakes I've made at the end. I am recording this again for the folks that are new to it. If you don't want to be seen, just turn off your video or whatever. So let me just put everybody on mute and we will get started here. Let me also just get out of my email so I don't get it going ding as we go. And let me share my screen and we'll get going here. Okay. Hopefully everybody sees a mock-up of the book cover. Okay. Just a way of background again for folks that are new to this, I'm Bill Cotter. I've been interested in World's Fairs for quite a number of years when I first went to the 64 World's Fair. Talking to my folks over the years about the 1939 World's Fair, they had gone to the one in New York and spoke a lot about that. And I don't think for a long time I'd ever heard that there was even a World's Fair in San Francisco at the same time. I found out even after I've moved out here to California, when you mentioned the 1939 World's Fair or anything in that period of time, people, a lot of them think in New York, and at least down here in Los Angeles, you know, where people don't talk about San Francisco much other than being envious that it's a lot cooler up there. The World's Fair just didn't come up a lot. But as I started looking into it, being sort of inquisitive and collecting pictures, I really got intrigued by it. Kind of a massive undertaking in many ways. Kind of fell, as I said, into the shadows under the New York Fair, but a fair that really stands out and more than holds its own against any fair. So the whole thing started in 1933. A fellow named Joseph Dixon was a real estate executive. I think he was actually retired by that point in time. And he was thinking about the fact that San Francisco was building two new bridges, the Golden Gate and the Bay Bridge, and they'd both be done in 1937. And wouldn't this be a great way to come off and celebrate? He thought it was a great idea. He tried to float it out to the politicians. The politicians didn't pay any particular attention, but he went off and wrote a letter to one of the local newspapers in their op-ed column. It got published and public word started booming. So we're going to go back to what he was able to help create. Interesting here, if you look at the souvenir ticket down here, it says that they have the right to close early. And as we will get into that, it was a good thing. They must have had good lawyers because they did not go the full planned season up to December 39. They closed in October. So we'll take a look here. San Francisco had a successful World's Fair in 1915. The Panama Pacific International Exhibition created a new section of town, landfill, basically expanded the city out there. The thing had been very successful, well received. So Dixon and others said, hey, if we could do it in 1915, we could surely do it in 1937. So let's go off, have a big fair. We have these two bridges to celebrate. But there was a lot of competition for it. Portland, Oregon wanted to do a fair to celebrate the completion of the Bonneville Dam. Los Angeles wanted to do a fair. Somehow they were going to tie it into the completion of Boulder Dam. And there was a lot of competition going on and a lot of people racing to get this done. And then New York popped up with the idea of having a fair. So San Francisco thought, okay, well, we'll have ours before everybody else. We'll get it in 1937. And they started working on a plan. This is part of a map that was published in one of the papers here, where it was going to be a giant thing about home building and all sorts of other odds and ends. But they found out over time that 1937 was going to be too ambitious, 1938 was going to be too ambitious, and it ended up being in 1939. So it ended up going head to head with New York, but as I'll talk about, that did not end up being a major factor. But one of the things they had to do is figure out where to put this fair. Everywhere they initially looked at was already being used. The site of the 1915 fair was being used. There were other places that were already under, the land had been redeveloped or had new things built on it, and nobody was willing to give it up. So they came up with a very unlikely idea of let's build a fair out in the middle of the bay. There was another effort underway at the same time to build a new airport for San Francisco. Back at that point in time, to get to the Pacific, you had to really use a seaplane. They were the only ones that were big enough and had the range to get out to Hawaii or on to, continue on to Japan or anything. So the airport that they wanted to build had to be on the water. The World's Fair could be anywhere, but luckily they decided why not do both together. So they went to a set of shoals off the shore of Yerba Buena Island and started piling dirt and dirt and dirt and more dirt in. And it was a massive project. They were estimating it was going to be about a $50 million project to build this whole thing out. No way the fair could have done it on their own. The airport folks said they couldn't have done it on their own. But by combining forces, they were able to do it with a pretty good infusion of federal money. Federal money wasn't going to be available to build a site for the World's Fair, but it would be available to build a site for an airport. So they started working and dredging and filling it out. So over time, more and more dirt dredged up from the bottom. They built a causeway out from the island here to make access easier, and they started working. The Corps of Engineers was in charge of it. They had some private companies helping along with it, but it was amazing for the folks of San Francisco, I imagine, to see this thing being erected out there in the bay. Finally, they got to the point where they had enough land. They were still filling in one side of the island when they started building the first side of the island. And this unusual looking structure is the beginning of one of two massive airplane hangars that were going to be built on the island. Again, this was always planned to be a permanent airport. So the federal government, besides kicking in the money to build the island itself, threw in the money to build the administration building for the fair, which was going to become the airport terminal, and also build two of these gigantic hangars. So the steel is going up here to have this hangar built. And finally, things are coming along. This one hangar is looking pretty good. The admin building is in the background. And what was interesting was the fair organizers would allow people to come out and hold parties or events out on the island during the construction as a way of bringing in a little extra cash, but also public awareness. So you could come out and you could have your gardening club come out or your photography club come out or anything, and you could see the various structures being built. Here, the Tower of the Sun is going up. Off on the other side, these buildings look very big and substantial. They're basically stucco covers over wooden frames, and they the tower in the center has a steel frame because it had to be so tall and thin to steel was needed to be able to support it. But again, these were temporary buildings intended to last for about 8 months and then be torn down. But you could wander around, have a nice picnic lunch, go out and see what was going on. They would actually cater a lunch for your organization if needed. And it worked. People would go out there and they'd start talking about these buildings they had seen, the wonders that were out there. Nothing was available during any of this as far as interiors. But if you came from almost anywhere other than Thailand or Cambodia and you saw a building like this, it was probably unique and you went back and talked about it. Finally, it was all done. You have Treasure Island. It was named by a publicity fellow from the fair. And it evoked all sorts of thoughts of the California gold rush and the important role San Francisco played in that. There also had been a recent movie about Treasure Island and how exotic that had been. So kind of brought it into mind. But this is the sort of view you'd see if you were driving over the Bay Bridge and looking down. Again, this side of the island has the two hangars on it and everything else stretching off into the distance. Opening day, huge success. The governor came. He was not feeling real well. There was a doubt whether he'd show up or not, but he did come and make it. This is the administration building for the fair, the plane terminal building. I understand that in this court where all these people are standing, they buried a time capsule with the plans for the fair, and it's covered over in a parking lot now, so I don't know if we'll ever see it. But opening day finally came. This is not opening day. It's just another day going to the fair. There were there were several different ways to get there. Car was one way, so you could come in. You also see a marina here. You could come with your private boat. A lot of big name people came with their private yachts. people were worried. What if I got out to the fair and the parking spaces were full? So they put up these signs along the bridges and the roads going to the fair. Very high tech. We see that there were 8,000 spots being used, still a whole bunch to go. And it looks high tech, but it was actually just pieces of canvas pulled on a rope that somebody would come by and update periodically to let you know that it was out there. But many people, I think majority of people came out by ferry. It was convenient. They had ferries that ran from San Francisco and from Oakland. You could come over and get a nice boat ride out there and enjoy the fair. And this is what the fair basically looked like, laid out sort of in a grid pattern, which is great because it was a square or mostly square to start with. And they had all these great names that the same fellow that came up with Treasure Island came up with names of Golden Bell Way and Palm Avenue and things like that. But we'll be taking a hop, skip, and jump as we run around and try to look at the major parts of it. Again, a look from the air. We've got the Tower of the Sun over to the left, the Lakes of the Nations over to the right. The parking lot looks like they were having a very busy day. And you could see why when the parking lot's that full, people were worried about what if I drove all the way out there and there were no parking spots. So the second year of the fair, they actually expanded the size of the parking lot to make it a little bit safer for people to come out. But that's why the ferries were such an important part of getting people over there. This is the sort of view you'd see if you're coming on the ferry. And think about how exotic this looks. You're going along and you see these giant towers shaped like elephants, palm trees out there, on the island. And, what's going to be inside when you get in there? And one of the first things you saw when you got out there was what they called the magic carpet. It was a large field of ice plant. For those of us out here in California, we probably know ice plant more as something they put along the side of the freeways to keep them looking nice or to keep the dirt eroding. But it's a very colorful plant, and they had a huge carpet of this outside. They also had many other gardens, and that's one of the things that really made, for me, the 39 San Francisco event stand out from New York, was that they really went out for a much more carefully coordinated look of color, the styling of the buildings, and also the sheer amount of garden space that they devoted to this. And coming up to the entrance, you have the Elephant Towers. It was a young 26-year-old architect, not too long out of school, Donald McKay, had come up with the idea for these buildings. Again, absolute silliness. There's nothing inside those elephants. There's no particular reason that I could think of if you have a World's Fair that's the pageant of the Pacific that you tie it into a bunch of elephants. But folks loved them. It was a great looking thing to see, come in, see the elephants sitting up there. And when you got inside, there were elephants. You had the elephant train, which would take you around. There was actually several of them. One would take you from the parking lot over to the entrances if you wanted. Others would take you on guided tours around the fairgrounds. And it's really kind of silly. It's just a tram. It's built on a Ford chassis and drives around, but super popular. They sold tickets to it. You could come home with your souvenir ticket to the elephant train, and it may look a little hokey or whatever in 2020, but in 1939 it was really cool to go riding around pulled by an elephant. Or you could get a ride in a roller chair. They had students from Stanford and other universities who would push you around the fair and give you a guided tour. Or you could get pulled around in a rickshaw. And the rickshaw has turned out not to be anywhere near as popular as the roller chairs. Might be that there was a stigma attached to them about coolies pulling around and that sort of thing. But they try to make them more popular. They had stage races of celebrities in them or politicians in them, but the rickshaws never caught on as much as the roller chairs did. And we'll go take a look around. We're looking down again at the Tower of the Sun. It was not the official theme structure of the fair. It really became the unofficial one. It appears in a tremendous amount of merchandise and postcards, other things. Originally, it was supposed to be a tower, the Tower of Life, a huge building, and for whatever reason, they were not able to construct it. We'll get to what they did call their official theme structure later on, but the Tower of the Sun was it's an interesting situation. I personally like it. I think it was a striking design. I think it caught the eye. A lot of architectural critics of 1939 detested it, calling it an ugly spike into the sky. They just didn't appreciate the look of it at all. But it was a to me, a very interesting structure, well-designed, sleek lines, and it also gave the eye a central point of focus. I mean, that's one of the things Disney did with his theme parks by putting the castles there. You always have an idea of where you are in relation to something else. If you can look up and see the spires of a castle, or something that helps you orient yourself to where you are, to where you might want to be going. So it was to me a success. Again, I'm not an architectural critic, but I liked it. So. And it was, again, the fairgrounds were spectacular in terms of fountains and flowers. This was what was called the Treasure Garden, looking down towards the tower. It's much further than it looks due to the telephoto lens. But this is sort of open vistas, a lot of wide open spaces that you got. This is another wide open area. The court of reflections were looking out from the tower of the sun across the court of reflections and across the lakes, and that's the federal building way in the background. And we'll walk our way down there. But this is sort of what you get on the ground. Again, lots of fountains and lights, and I'll get the lighting later on, but they really went out of their way to make this very color coordinated and architecturally coordinated. The temple compound, again, these they used influences from all sorts of different cultures and everything to put in these buildings. And what it's interesting about it is your eye is driven to these towers. Well, behind the towers are two basically very bland buildings. They're giant exhibit halls, the sort of thing you might see if you go out to the LA County Fair. But they're you're not really thinking about the big buildings. Your eyes are taken to the tower. It's really a masterful piece of design from my point of view to make you intrigued. I want to go in. I want to see what's happening in there, and you don't really stop and think about the more industrial nature of some of it. Same on this one, the Court of the Seven Seas. You have on either side two very large exhibit halls full of things like the latest toasters, or the latest in new foods, or how we make glass, how we make steel. But your eye's not thinking about exhibit halls. You're thinking about these strange buildings, the colorful banners, all of that. Down at the end of the street is Pacifica, a large statue, 80-foot tall, that was well received. And this, again, is an overhead view. Pacifica would be right down at the bottom right-hand corner, looking back up to the Tower of the Sun. You can see, again, how the buildings are very large. But down on street level, you're not seeing any of that. You're seeing all of the architectural motifs that were put in there purposely to distract you away from it. And again, mentions Pacifica is done by artist Ralph Stackpool. She was the goddess of the Pacific rim that he created for it. And I think he said he went through 50 to 70 different designs before he came up with the one that we see here. Very impressive. She's got her hands held out in a sign of peace. Behind her is a prayer curtain, metal bangles that were on the this curtain, and the idea was that they would shimmer and catch the eye, but they would also tinkle and make noise as the wind caught them. Well, they had purposely built the buildings in this area very tall to act as windbreaks to keep the San Francisco winds from coming in. And they ended up making them too effective, and they found out that the curtain didn't tingle as it was supposed to. So they had to put small electric motors hidden on it to make it move in the absence of a breeze. Down below, you'll see a sign, Cavalcade. Originally, this was supposed to be the entrance to a grand hall. As it turned out, later they made it an open air amphitheater, but we'll take a look inside of there. They did large stage shows. The first one was very popular in 1939. They came back with a bigger, expanded version in 1940. In 1939, it was about America, the Cavalcade of the West. On 1940, they ended up adding in a bunch of other scenes, such as Gettysburg and Valley Forge and things, to make it more of all of America, not just the Western states. But they had large flats that they could roll sets in, fake trains, wagons, all sorts of things. So it was a very popular show. And this is the Fountain of the Western Waters. Again, right in front of Pacifica, you can see one of the buildings in the background acting as the windbreak. Most of the sculptures out at the fairgrounds were done and made out of plaster, much cheaper. It's also much faster for the artists to work on. Some of these artists were turning out multiple pieces, 6, 7, 8 pieces for the fair. And if they had to carve this out of granite or marble or something else, it would have taken them forever. It also would have cost a lot more money. So most of the statues at the fair were made out of plaster, and they did not survive over time. Most of the ones here, though, at the Fountain of Western Waters are done out of poured concrete, because they had to be able to stand up to having water hitting them over time. If you were on one of my talks about the 39 New York Fair, I mentioned how a lot of the plaster pieces had to be redone between the fair and have supporting rods inserted, things like that, because they were getting soft from getting hit by water. Here they planned for it. They made them out of a different material, which turned out very lucky because a lot of these pieces did survive. You had some industrial presence at this fair. Ford had a nice size exhibit, but it was nothing like you had in New York. And Ford, if you remember, in New York, you got in the car, they drove you around. It was a massive pavilion. Here, things were much more low key, much less industrial in nature to this particular fair. You had a lot of the people participating at both fairs, but instead of having their own giant pavilions or buildings like Westinghouse, they had an exhibit inside a hall. General Motors had a very small one inside a hall in 39. They came back in style in 40. But it was very much more of a Western themed fair, which was what they had entirely hoped to do, promoting the Western states and not just American manufacturing. Over on the left, you see the music hall that was not open when the fair first got there. They were not able to find a tenant for the space, but so it sat there empty for the first couple months of the fair. But they started noticing right off the bat that attendance was less than anticipated. People were not coming in the numbers that they were hoped for. It sounds like a common World's Fair, problem. So they decided they would offer free concerts, try to get more people out. So they quickly built out the music hall. You can still see Phil Harris was there. They brought in a lot of big name entertainers, no extra charge for your admission. Come in and see the free show, and it turned out to be helpful, but it didn't quite get the numbers up as high as we'd like. And we're going to continue to go see more of the grounds. This again is the Treasure Garden. In the back was a club that was a private club. We'll see a closer view coming up. But again, gardens mentioned. They had just beautiful gardens, and the gardens were carefully color coordinated to the buildings around them, which was kind of amazing. Matter of fact, there's a book about the art of Treasure Island, and he actually goes into more detail about the gardens and the type of flowers that were put out there. All of these flowers were specially made or grown for the fair, keeping in mind that just a few years before this had been nothing but water. And they had had a massive program to grow the trees, grow the flowers, the flowering shrubs and everything, and bring them into the fairground. And it was all a very, very nice effort for them to do it. One major section of the fair was the California group. It was a way that they could try to get as many of the counties in California to participate. So if you look off to the right, you'll see a whole bunch of counties all in one building. And this was done because a lot of these counties just frankly didn't have the money to build their own pavilions. So they formed something called the California Commission. The state backed it, and they would go off and get different groups with different counties with common interests and put them together. A lot of politics, as you can imagine. You know, I want my name at the top of the list. No, we're going to put your name at the bottom. I want my exhibit near the door. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. So the politics of getting everybody to participate are kind of amazing, but they were able to pull it off. You had some great things for anybody that had ever seen the pictures of people driving through a redwood tree. Wow, this was neat. You know, as a recreation of that tunnel. You could go in, you could see the names of these counties here on either side of it, and they had almost all these county pavilions had a common theme. We have great travel capabilities. Come here and see our tourism. We'd love you to come up here and buy the stuff we make up here, and here's some of our history. So a lot of the common things, but presented in different ways. This was a gal named Zoe Del Lantis. She was the theme girl for the fair. She'd been hired during the publicity or the building of the fair to go off and strike publicity poses, and she became, according to Life magazine, the most photographed woman in the world at the time. She generally was seen in a pirate costume, pirate tying into the Treasure Island theme, but she was everywhere. She ran around the world getting pictures taken, promoting the fair, and she, after the fair, had an amazing career, woman aviator, executive in the aviation industry, and she unfortunately just passed away relatively recently. But she's posing here on a piece of one of the redwoods in the area. And again, different counties, different exhibits. Some were very modern looking buildings. This particular one, the husband and wife team did both the outside, and they also got down to the details of doing the furnitures inside. LA County, for those of us that live out here today, it's hard to imagine. They were promoting that it was the agricultural breadbasket of California. Look at all the fruits you could get, all the vegetables you could get. There was so much agriculture in California. Come down here, buy all the things we have to sell and feed your area. Again, different ones put together. There are theaters inside of these things. They had different shows, exhibits, and at times what they would do also use these theaters to bring in performers from their particular counties and do musical recitals or band shows or whatever, which is always a great thing. As I've mentioned on past talks, if you get somebody coming from the Granada Hills band and they're going to play in the band, well, their mom and dad's going to come, their aunt and uncles might come, the kids down the street might come. So the more that you get people from your counties to come into the fair, the better it was for the fair. You had an outdoor area here, again, talking about the forest. You could see these trees all have the names of the counties carved on them. Big wall behind it to keep out the rest of the fair, where you could come out here and have a nice time, have a campfire in the center, relax, and again, learn more about that particular area. Example of one of the dioramas inside one of the pavilions. Lots and lots of stuff done about California history. I say in the book, the fair must have kept model makers busy for years. There are so many of these. On the left, you have the California Auditorium, and on the right, the Federal Building. The California Auditorium was the major radio center for the fair. Back at this point in time, TV was just coming along, so radio was big. Lots of broadcasts out here, but they also did a lot of live entertainment in this same facility. The Foley's here was a popular show. It left. The replacement show didn't do as well. They brought it back, and it came back even bigger for 1940. And inside, you could get, all the women, and you can imagine probably about 6 minutes after this picture was taken, there were less clothes than seen here. But it was viewed as a very tasteful show. It wasn't viewed as a girly show like a lot of the stuff in the gateway entertainment area was. So very popular, well received, and it sold a lot of tickets. More of the California buildings. Mission Trails recreated elements from 7 different missions, all built into one. The missions that used to run up and down the length of California. San Francisco had a big building. It's the host building for the fair. The mayor came out, did a lot of business in this building during the year, just like LaGuardia did in the New York City building back in New York. Again, just all the sculptures, all the little reliefs up on the upper level and everything. They really went to a lot of effort to make the fair appealing. California Coliseum was another arena that they had a giant track in. They had bicycle races, they had rodeos, they had all sorts of performances and events. Another one built by the State Commission. So all sorts of venues and ways to entertain. Now, about 2-3 years before the fair opened, the brochures were full of the fact that full 3/4 of the United States were going to be exhibiting at the fair. Turned out not to be the case. A couple of them had small exhibits inside the other halls that we looked at, but there were just a few that built their own pavilions. And it's kind of interesting. You wonder, what made Missouri so interested in going to this expense, or Illinois. They had a major diorama inside here. So it supposedly represented every building in the city of Chicago at the time. So it's, somewhere in somebody's files, it tells you why those states felt it was worth the time and money. Others basically went for a lower key approach. A lot of them went into the Hall of the Western States. Again, Oregon wanted to be here, Washington wanted to be here, Idaho wanted to be here. They all have basically exhibits inside this particular hall. It allowed them to participate, but without breaking the financial, coffers of that particular state. You had a few private pavilions, like this was the Temple of Religion. It was a organization that thought, that the clouds of war are coming along. Maybe if we all started thinking about things other than that and start talking about peace and religion, we could avoid the unfortunately inevitable conflict. So they built a large facility out here and let any particular religion that wanted to participate come and use the facilities for services, speeches, that sort of thing. Had a very nice garden that represented all the plants you would have seen in biblical times. Again, another industrial sort of thing, Pan American Airways. They were intended to be the full-time and resident airline of the island when it was turned over after the fair. So here we have the Hall of Air Transportation and a sign out front telling you about Pan Am. This was one of the two hangar buildings that was built. So in this particular building, you went in and you could see Pan Am Clippers on display. And if I think I have a picture, yeah, the massive flying boats. And the other one became an art gallery. So you could come and watch the Clippers land as they came in from Hawaii. You could watch them being serviced. There's a stairway off to the side. You could go up and get a tour. Or you could watch one of them setting off. Here's one of them taxiing out to take off. And just think about it, 16 to 18 hours later, they'd be in Hawaii. You know, a little bit of change from what we've experienced today. But I think their seats were a little more comfortable and a little more stylish. And it really started opening up the travel. I think back at this point in time, somebody said a trip to Hawaii and one of these things was around $1,600. And in terms of their money and today's money, when admission to the fair was like 50 cents, start thinking what $1,600 to go to Hawaii would be. Big amount of money put in by the federal government for the federal building in the back. Very, very well received. Architects loved it, the bright colors of the mural, the styling of the building. But what was really well received were the interior exhibits. President Roosevelt had been asked to make a decision, should there be a fair in New York or a fair in San Francisco? Being a politician, he said, why not do both? And he threw the weight of the federal government behind both fairs. So if you went into the Federal Pavilion, you would see all sorts of exhibits on just about every branch of the federal government you can imagine existed. You know, how your stamps were printed and your mail delivered, how the agriculture department helped you with your soybean crops, you know, how we were building dams, display after display after display inside. And again, if you look at the old newspapers of the time, lots of praise for how well the exhibits were done and jokes about people finally had a chance to figure out where their tax dollars went. So again, two large murals out here. This one has a kind of interesting hidden thing. If you see the fellow with the jackhammer off sort of to the right, that's the guy that was the federal commissioner that was in charge of the federal building. And the artist, as a favor, put him in as the fellow with the jackhammer. You had 48 colonnades because we had 48 states at the time. There was the state flag and a little information about each of them as they went down through the center of the building, lined up perfectly with the central axis of the fair down through the Arch of Triumph and into the Tower of the Sun. Behind it was a B-17, and this wasn't just a B-17. This was the B-17. It was the very first B-17 bomber built, rushed down there by Boeing, by the government to show people that the United States government is ready for war. If anybody wants to mess with us, we're going to come and kick your butt. So long crowds of people going in there. If you've ever been inside a B-17, they do not lend themselves to tours. It's a very narrow area that goes through the bomb bay area. In the report that the federal government published after the fair, they talked about how the exhibit was at capacity almost every day, that so many people wanted to line up and see this because it had been touted as America's most advanced plane. And they built something like 17,000 of them during the course of the war. There's only about a dozen left, about 9 flying. But this was, again, the very first one of that armada. They also had a section of the General Sherman tree out back, the largest tree in the world. People were horrified. Oh my God, you cut down the biggest tree in the world to put it on display at the World's Fair. No, it's a mock-up, luckily. They did use other redwood pieces, and they simulated what the General Sherman would look like. They put markers on to say, at this point in time, Columbus was coming. At this point in time, this was happening. But, you know, when you first look, you go, wow, how'd they get that chunk out of the tree? And then we turned to the French Pavilion to start our tour in the international areas. Again, this is truly a World's Fair. They had a very nice international presence. Some of the pavilions were built by the countries overseas, taken apart, shipped over here. Others were built here with American labor and parts. And we'll take a look at through some of them. France, very nice, clean design. Also had a very popular restaurant nearby that you could go to and enjoy yourself. A lot of these restaurants just didn't have dinner. They also had dinner shows, entertainment. French Indochina, intricate carvings on it. A lot of these pieces, again, as I mentioned, brought in material from their own countries. Sometimes the whole building, sometimes it was just wooden elements or pieces that were added on to buildings built here. Netherlands Antilles, the Javanese restaurant. This had a very popular 20-course restaurant that was a gimmick that you get served by 20 different waiters bringing out your food. I don't know if you were expected to tip 20 different times at the end of it, but well received. Italy had a massive column here with the names of its major cities and regions. They also had a large marble building facade of the walkways and that, where a lot of these buildings were done cheaply, again, knowing that it was a 6-month, 8-month planned fair. Some of them, like Italy, went way out with bringing in a tremendous amount of marble and that to show we're strong, we're vibrant, we can afford to do this because we are a major player. Come and join us, come see us, come trade with us. We're here to stay. Argentina was done by one of their famous architects down there. And I think if I remember my notes right, the entire building from the time they turned dirt to the time that it was done was an amazing 59 days. So if you were in a hurry to get things done and you had the money to do it, you could get it done. Brazil, another striking building, big mural in the front, done by actually an American artist who did one on the front, one on the back of the building. Mexico, super popular building, not just for the displays, but a very, very well-received restaurant. A lot of people, I guess, again, it sounds strange in 2020, but a lot of people are getting their first taste of Mexican food, and it was a very popular venue indeed. El Salvador, another popular pavilion, live musicians. Panama, smaller pavilion, mentioned here that the gardeners are kept busy trying to make plants that look at home in Panama grow in the San Francisco weather. You had others like Australia, again, big presence. They had a zoo bringing in animals, things, again, we all go to the zoo today. You look at a kangaroo or a wallaby or a wombat, you don't think a lot about it. Well, that was super new and different for a lot of people in 1939. Out on the lakes of the nation, you could rent a whole different type of boats. There was a lagoon boats rental stand, and you could get these swan boats or others. The swan boats became a popular thing that, say you're the mayor of Granada Hills and you want to go and have a challenge with the mayor of Mission Hills. The two of you would have a paddle boat ride race across the lake. Who's better, the Lions Club or the Elks, or the Shriners? Let's have a paddle boat race. So newspapers often carried stories about, the different ones. At the end, the losers and the winners would shake hands and both proclaim their cities or their organizations were great and go on their way. But it's kind of fun to read the accounts of just how into it some people got as far as coming out and practicing to be ready to make sure they won the race for their town or their organization. This was the state of Johor in Malaysia. It was a wooden building built over there, brought over here, financed by the leader of the country at the time. Again, massive amount of work and effort to build these things and bring them over here. Philippines had a very nice bandstand. They did a lot of concerts out there. Japan was a really interesting situation. They built these buildings in Japan, made them out of wood with wood pegs, try to build them without any nails or anything, using traditional Japanese crafts. When the fair ended, Japan didn't want to take the buildings down and bring them back to Japan because they had nothing really to do with them. So they offered them free. Anybody could take them. If you want to dismantle the building, take this home and put it up for your own house or do something with it, it's yours, free. Well, there were a couple of people that were interested until the federal government stepped in and said, not so fast. These buildings were brought in tax-free. All this wood, all this material and everything was tax-free. So if you want the free building, you have to pay the taxes, and here's what it's going to cost you. Well, nobody wanted the buildings at that point, so they were left there when the fair closed, and the government was given the chore of tearing them down. The Navy first thought we'll just blow them into oblivion and haul away the rubble, and they planted explosives in them ignited and the building survived. They were that well built. So to get rid of them, they finally had to have a massive bonfire and just burn them to the ground. But isn't it a shame to think that if somebody had been able to just pay the tax bill, that these could have survived? Luckily, a bunch of the plants and some of the rock work and stuff did survive. There were people that were able to do get these from the Japanese pavilion, because they were not brought all from Japan. They were grown here and planted here. So some of the Japanese gardens was donated to the University of California and did survive. And inside, you'd get an exhibit of Japanese life, more modern furniture. They weren't all sitting on the floor. I doubt if in reality the women of the time were all wearing kimonos like that, but it was an example of Japanese living. On the left, you have Pacific House. That was the replacement for the theme building that was never built. They touted it as the theme structure, the theme home for the fair. Never really took off in terms of merchandise or anything. An interesting building, but to me, it's definitely not a theme building. And again, just a nice view along the lakes. Again, you have different type of boats. You can see people getting ride in a motor launch, there's paddle boats, different ways to go out on the lake and enjoy yourself. This was a Norwegian Ski Lodge, again, built in Norway, all wooden pegs, and done with traditional style. The same people that built it in Norway came over here to reassemble it. Luckily, this one had a happier ending than the Japan Pavilion. Somebody said, I will pay the duty on it, and they bought this building. The same people that had built it took it apart, moved it to a new location, and it is now somebody's private home. I don't know if they still have sod growing on the roof in their home as it is today, but this building does survive. In 1933, Chicago had a very successful World's Fair. That was one of the big reasons that Mr. Dixon had gotten his idea about San Francisco doing the same thing. And in Chicago, they had a lot of villages. You had a American recreated village, you had an English village, you had Chinese villages, and that. They sort of did some of the same here in San Francisco, but nowhere near the number of villages. So here you had the Chinese village outside. This barker is trying to get you to come inside, see all the wonders and wares inside. I got a kick out of how stylishly this woman's dressed. People certainly dress differently for a World's Fair than they do any such exhibit today. But inside, all sorts of exhibits, restaurants, dancing, as the sign says, Chinese restaurants, of course, and a very large collection of jade that was on display that people were very positive about. Hawaii was a territory at the time, but it was here at the fair. You could go in. It was a recreation of what it would be like if you arrived in Hawaii by ship or by clipper, things about Hawaiian tribal customs and rights, and of course a big push buy our pineapples and buy our sugar cane. New Zealand was there, recreated lodge. Again, all these carvings and everything brought over from New Zealand. This is inside the Bank of America building, a massive mural. I didn't put this in here just because I used to work for Bank of America. This is just an example, again, to me, of all the artwork that was done for the fair that just doesn't survive except in pictures. Again, you could just do a bank, but if you wanted to show that you were the bank, you spent a lot of money on it. You got a lot of time and effort put into showing what your bank was. And it worked. This was not only just the official bank of the fair where most of the pavilions came and did their banking, but it was an attraction. It was billed as the streamlined bank of the future. And an amazing number of people that I have in the book, I don't remember the number right now, but tens of thousands of people would come in for a tour of the bank. And it's a wonderful idea. Outside the bank, they had a mural that showed where all the current Bank of America branches were across the state of California. And if you got 30,000 people coming into your bank branch in a day looking around, hey, if only a few of them go back home and decide to open a bank account with Bank of America, that's money well spent. Sermons from Science, we've seen them at a bunch of other World's Fairs. Again, they'll pass a massive blast of electrical energy through you and say, if God didn't want me to live, he wouldn't have, and tying science and religion together. Another restaurant, the Continental Cafe, had two different things, the restaurant on the left and a coffee shop. You could go in and get an entire meal at the coffee shop for about $4. If you wanted to spend $5 or $6, and we're including cocktails, by the way, if you went and spent maybe $6 or so at the restaurant, you had a whole band, I think it was about a 20-piece orchestra, entertaining you in the evenings. So when the fair first started, they tried to make a big point of the fact that we have food for everybody. They're high-priced restaurants if you want an elegant dining experience. But we have burger shops, coffee shops, donut shops. We have all sorts of junk food things for people to come out, and a budget for everybody. Hall of Flowers. This was built out of glass blocks. After the fair was moved to the California State Fairgrounds. Unfortunately, it was lost a few years ago when they modernized it, but it was, again, a very modern structure and allowing as much light in as popular. And it was a brilliant thing because every ladies' garden club, and there were many, many, many of them at the time, would be invited to come and put your flowers on display in the Hall of Flowers and come down just like your marching bands. Everybody from your gardening club would like to come down and see your rhododendrons on display at the Hall of Flowers. So it was a popular event. The Coast Guard was part of the government, of course, but they did not participate in the major federal building because they had the small building out there that was actually a working Coast Guard facility in case people needed help in the waters. But they would go and have boats capsize in the water. The Coast Guard would go out and rescue them and bring them back to shore and come back and see it. We're going to do it again in a couple of hours. So a very popular venue, people going out, getting a sea breeze, watching the thing. They demonstrated artificial respiration and showing how the Coast Guard had been formed, operated lighthouses, did all the things they do. This was kind of an interesting day. Lots of companies were invited to have their own day at the fair. So you could have theoretically Bill Cotter Day at the fair, or I don't know, Dave English Day at the fair. And you could sell discount tickets to your folks, come out and enjoy it. Well, the Matson shipping line had Matson Day at the fair for all their employees, get discount tickets, but they brought in one of their ships. Had just come back from a cruise to Hawaii and some of the Pacific Islands. They had brought a bunch of performers over on the ship that entertained in the stage arena on shore. They couldn't get everybody that came to the fair that day out onto the ship. You can imagine trying to take an extra, 80,000 people on tenders out to go and visit it. But everybody that came to the fair that day got a free lay to walk around the fairgrounds, and you can very easily date pictures when you see hundreds of people walking around with leis. But a great bit of publicity. The papers all carried the story about how the Mariposa, the ship out here, was anchored there. And again, they had a huge performance in the arena. Another thing that got a lot of publicity was a ski jump. By the way, some of these pictures are a little fuzzy, seen full size. There's inserts waiting for the other ones to arrive from a few sources. But they built this ski jump and had actual ski jump competitions out there in the middle of Treasure Island. And as one announcer said during the exhibit, this is probably the only time you're going to have people doing jumping on man-made snow on a man-made mountain on top of a man-made island. So it was, again, kind of a real different gimmick. People would come out from different things, Norway, that sort of thing, world-class skiers, and come out and participate and try to win a gold medal ski jumping in the middle of San Francisco Harbor. National Cash Register, they put one of these here, one in New York. They had one in Chicago, and up at the top you could see the attendance today. The other side told you the attendance to date for the fair, and down below you could go in and get a display of all the products that National Cash Register made. And we're off to the gateway now, the entertainment area. It's kind of interesting. They had tried to come up with a contest to name what the gateway should be. And they had a gateway in Chicago, and they had thousands of entries. And what did they end up picking here was the gateway again. But this was the major entertainment area of Sally Rand's Nude Ranch on the left. Not a dude ranch, but a nude ranch. She had a very popular concession up in Chicago and repeated it down here. Constant articles about whether or not they were going to shut her down, whether the shows were too risque. Some 14-year-old kids snuck in, but other shows, as we'll see, had some nudity displays along here. Off to the right, you have a Penny Arcade for my Disney fans. A bunch of the Disney animators talked later about how they'd gone up, enjoyed the gateway, things like the Penny Arcade. And there's a Donald Duck cartoon where Donald goes. It's called A Good Time for a Dime. He goes to an arcade and has, of course, the type of misadventures that only Donald Duck can have. But this area was open at night. The rest of the fair closed at 10 p.m. This stayed open until 2 in the morning. This is also the only part of the fair that had direct lighting. If you look at these banners that go out to the central pole, there's bare light bulbs hanging there that would be lit up at night. They intentionally drew as much attention to this part of the fair at night to get as much crowds there to get them to stay a little longer, spend a little extra money, and have a good time at the fair. You also had child entertainment. This clown would entertain. He has a very popular stage show, brought people out, but then you could also get a ride around in his little cart. There were all sorts of rides here. This company had started to try to make simulators for the Air Force or the Army Air Corps at the time on how to fly, and it turned out they could make more money in making this Rollo plane ride. There were also these flying scooters that you get raced around, bumper cars. There were also roller coasters, twin Ferris wheels like they had at Chicago. Another village mentioned, this was a Scottish village, a recreation. You'd pay a fee, of course, to come in, see the recreated Scottish village with the village green, a bunch of ducks out on the water out there. Across from it, that long wall going over there was the entrance to a driving range. So if you had nothing else to do, you could go out and get a golf club and start hitting balls out there. Or you could go down and see the Incubator Babies. Again, things we take for granted today. If you have a premature baby, you have an incubator or whatever. Well, in 1933, they had put these on display at the Chicago World's Fair. Another enterprising person put them here. They made a big point about how many babies you were brought here, taken care of. It wasn't quite as successful as in 1933 Chicago, because by now hospitals had started getting these, so the novelty had started wearing off. But you could come down here and again see the actual birth of twins. Well, they didn't have a 100 or 200 pregnant women with twins lined up waiting to deliver for the show. You got to go see a movie about the birth of twins, but you found that out after you've paid your money. You could go and see all sorts of other things that would take your money. There were games of chance. There were people doing predictions about things. You could get yourself photographed. You could get somebody doing a sculpture for you, all sorts of things. Lots of ways to spend money on the gateway. And one other thing that we had entertainment-wise was Walt Disney did his first commercial film in many, many years. He had started making commercial movies when he first got into animation, but he did one called Mickey's Surprise Party. Now, almost every book about Disney talks about this movie premiering at the 1939 New York World's Fair. Wrong. This was February. The New York World's Fair didn't open until 2-3 months later. So this was a film. This is Walt at the premiere, coming out. He's here with the Nabisco executive, and obviously they're quite happy with the results. Very, very popular movie because it was free. You could come in, you could see the Nabisco show. Lots of coverage for it. Great Mickey cartoon, Mickey and Minnie, well received. You could also go, before you got out there, you could play the Mickey and Donald's Race to Treasure Island. This was a thing done with Standard Oil, that every week they had a free magazine given away. I think some Weekly Tykes magazine or something. And there was a clip-on a coupon you could clip and cover up your spot in the game map here and try to finish it. The other side, a very nicely illustrated Donald and Mickey story about going there. So this was a great thing, because what kid didn't want to make their father go and get Standard Oil every single week, whether he needed it or not, because you had to fill this up. So again, the marketing power of Disney was really great, and Standard Oil was very, very happy with the results. So we're going to jump into 1940 now. What had happened was they closed the fair down in 39, closed it a couple weeks early because they realized we're not making money, and every week we stay open, we got to pay the guards, we got to pay the people that work here, and we're losing money. Let's close this thing early and just cut our losses and be done with it. So they closed the fair, and all sorts of battles went on. There were people that wanted their money and wanted to run like hell, mostly the bankers. There were other people that hadn't had their bills paid yet that thought, well, if there's any way to have another season of the fair, maybe I can get my bills paid. And some other people that had concessions and stuff said, I didn't do too bad in 39. I might like to come back in 1940. Well, they had court-appointed receivers and battles and arguments and everything. And finally, in December of 39, a judge made the ruling that anybody that wanted their money back could get it. And they got about 23 cents on the dollar, I think, for their investment. If anybody wanted to roll it over into the 1940 season, or if anybody wanted to put new money into the 1940 season, go ahead and have another show of the fair. So they had to really race. As hard as it is to build and operate or anything a World's Fair, now in December, they were trying to get this thing open. There was no way they were going to get it open for the February date that the 39 fair had done, but they decided, let's try to get this open in May. So all sorts of new contracts, all sorts of new things having to be done. But this is why you never see merchandise that says the 1939-1940 Golden Gate International Exposition or World's Fair. Like New York, it was planned as the 1939 event, and 1940 was done as an afterthought. They had looked at the fact that Chicago had lost money on the 1933 version of their fair, but by coming back in 1940, they actually made a very nice profit because all the infrastructure was already paid for. You know, Pacifica here was already built. All she needed was the San Francisco Fire Department to come in with a hook and ladder truck, bring people up and start hosing her down to clean her up, come in and plant new flowers. And what was interesting was they decided on a whole new paint scheme for the 1940 season, much brighter colors. And that meant new flowers, because again, the flowers had to match the design of the buildings. In some cases, some people didn't come back. The Windmill Restaurant said, we're not coming back, so it became a fruit stand opportunity. This building actually came out of the fair after it was moved to a town, went through a series of owners, and was being used as a symbol for a car dealer when it burned down about 20, 30 years after the fair. And in some cases, you end up with weird things like you have Colombia, and right next to it, Switzerland. Well, this is the former Latin America group. The nations were in the Swiss part moved out, Switzerland moved in. So all of a sudden you have Switzerland in a very Spanish motif building. Such were the way things were done. Australia is gone. A lot of countries just could not come back. The war was consuming them. So other countries moved in. So here the Australian Pavilion has become Denmark. The France Pavilion became Ice Frolics. Again, France had much bigger problems on its plate than dealing with operating at a World's Fair. Women's Club out here had been the Yerba Buena Club, a private club. The Women's Club took it over. Very popular place to go, and a lot of artwork that was done by local artists were on display lining the halls, and it was probably one of the most successful venues if you could get somebody to invite you in for a meal. They brought a nice cable section in from the Golden Gate Bridge, put it on display. People had seen the bridge being built, but this was the first chance a lot of them got to see a piece of how it was done up close. Unfortunately, in 1940, they had a major fire. The California Pavilion on the left caught fire. They never did quite figure out why, but the building was absolutely destroyed. They were able to luckily get out some of the artwork, the most important piece of it. Fire crews there was a fire crew always stationed on the island, but they came across the bridge. They came from destroyers that were birthed out in the harbor. Army soldiers that were nearby, everybody came and just grabbed everything they could and hauled it out. But the building was a loss. The insurance on it had been on a sliding scale that if burned down on the first day, you got the full amount. If it burned down on the last day, you got next to nothing. So they didn't recoup their money on it, but luckily, most of the artwork was saved. That was the most important part of it. Important thing that year, Wendell Willkie, the contender running against Roosevelt for president, came to the fair. Big event for him to come out there. And you can see he had a huge crowd coming out, the ruins of the building there behind him. In the book, I mentioned this may have been one of his most successful events because he lost 38 states to 10 to Roosevelt. They also, in this particular year, had a major change to the Federal Pavilion, and that was the elimination of most of the exhibits for most of the bureaus that were in there. What had happened was these people all budgeted for the 1939 World's Fair. Then all of a sudden, somebody says, well, we're going to do the 1940 World's Fair. And they go, I don't have that in my budget. I don't have the money to fly people there, operate it, maintain it, do anything. So you're not going to have a display about the post office. You're not going to have a display about soybeans or whatever. So the Work Project Administration, WPA, came up and filled the void in a large way by putting in tremendous amount of displays here and over in the Art Museum about artists showing muralists at work. Diego Rivera making a giant piece that he's going to be doing. You could come and watch other sculptors be done at work. You could try your own hand at some of it. So the WPA became the major inhabitant during the 1940 season for that. General Motors had a small presence at the 39 fair. They came back, rented the former music hall, put in something that was over 3 times the size of their 1939 display, trying to make sure that they got the same sort of publicity that Ford had garnered. As time went by and the winds of war were getting closer, again, the American government was very anxious to put forward the message, we're ready for war, please don't push us on it. So you had more and more displays of military might out on the island. You had more and more ships coming in, being seen, photographed, aerial displays going overhead, again, trying to put the message through. But it didn't work, as we know. War eventually came, and finally the fair had to end itself, closed for good on December 29th, 1940. So we'll take a quick look before we end at some of the artwork. Again, I go into more detail in this in the book, which hopefully would be out around Christmas. But they did so many of these pieces of artwork, color coordinated with the buildings. A lot of these things were done in plaster, did not survive for various reasons. The Tower of the Sun, they filled the niches, the base. One guy did 4 different statues. They made 2 of each of them, put them in there. Whoops. This is in one of the Arch of Triumph. There were murals in there. Actually, this one wasn't. This was in the South Tower, I believe, in the temple compound. And this was the first garden. 2 different people did the set of 4 panels together about Eden and how things would look back there. The Pantheon was a display of artwork from the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, brought out here, put in about World War I major battle scenes. But just look at the artwork of the building itself, all the little touches of the carve-outs of the stars and the moon, the statue over the doorway. To me, very impressive. This was on the Court of the Seven Seas, the Spirit of Adventure, one of the front of the galleons that were carved up there, looking like the figurehead on the ships heading out to sea. Another one, Discovery. This was a 3-dimensional piece carved out of plaster, but again, made to look metallic. It was painted gold. And rather than just have a flat relief, the statue is coming right out of the sea, with a feeling of adventure. And again, to me, I just love to see all the differences they did. The temple compound, just carving the work of the stonework going over the doorway. Lots of detail. Well, they spent over $1 million, or maybe it was $1.5 million on artwork just for the fair, which was very well received by the art community and kept a lot of people employed for a number of time. More statues around the treasure garden. They had different ones out there, different motif, different lanterns, all these things designed especially for the fair. This was a kind of interesting piece. It was the girl and the penguins. She's down at the feet. The artist had done it, had died just before the fair was done. The widow was able to loan it to the fairground. So some of these pieces were done in bronze and things survived. This is a celestial sphere, but the same fellow that did the sphere at the 39 New York World's Fair and also did the pieces that stand today at the center of Rockefeller Center. It's outside the Art Museum, which was inside of what was one of the hangars. They got together a collection of art that they borrowed from around the world. Some estimates say $20 million, some say $40 million worth of art. Just again, more pieces that were done, displayed around the grounds. This particular one, the artist, Hague Patagian, was very clever. He built himself into it as the sculptor that's got his mallet down there. This was another statue that was done. Florence Nightingale put out on display during the fair. A huge amount of nurses came out to see it. It's one of the few pieces that survives. It's a hospital in the San Francisco area today. Tribute to the National Guard, another surviving piece, moved to the Capitol Park in Sacramento. Ocean Breeze, you can see, unfortunately, these things are temporary. She was painted to look metallic, but you can see how a chunk's already been taken out of the base there. So not all of them, unfortunately, survive. Fountains, more statues. It's just a great collection of artwork. Even the little details that they went to, like these large terracotta vases that were put along the side of the reflecting pool. Everything carefully done to complement the buildings around. This piece had been on display at the 1915 Pan Pacific, was discovered and brought back out. And again, we're just taking a quick look at some of the pieces around the Fountain of the Western Waters that have So, well, this one survived. This one did not. I don't think this one survived. Modern American woman. I just love, if you look at this, the look of the determination and strength in her face. Woman holding bananas. Polynesian girl is also a Polynesian boy. We'll see this guy again in a moment, a boy on a llama. So he's kind of a fun piece. He's looked like he's having a good time. I'm not sure how much the llama is enjoying it. This piece was interesting. Three sisters did it, and they wanted to go with a mural, but not just a flat mural. So this was done with giant sheets of masonite built up in various levels that they hand carved to give it the 3D effect. And they tried to keep the painting colors to a minimum to not distract from the central look of the figures. This was particularly striking at night. It was in the Court of Pacifica. A map that one of the artists did. He had also done some sculpture work. This was on a wall in the Court of Pacifica, kind of one of the better You Are Here pieces I've ever seen in my life. This was one of a series of murals done at Pacific House about how the Pacific Basins was settled. Here you see natives going with canoes and rafts and that sort of thing as one of the clippers comes in to bring civilization in. And you had murals, again, in all sorts of spots. This is inside the Triumphal Arch or Arch de Triomphe, or Arch of Triumph. They didn't use the French name. But again, I think this was about 80-foot tall mural, another one done by the same artist on the other side. Local artwork brought in from overseas. Again, this was at New Zealand. This was interesting. They did a big thing in the Federal Building about Indians and how their history and that sort of thing. And they had a American artists do these posters that were based on ancient Indian art, and they started giving them away. And he sat out actually on a boat making these things and turning them out. And they became very popular. You could just go into the pavilion and get one, or for years you could write to the federal government and say, could you send me one? They finally ran out. And now if you have one of these, you can get several $1,000s at an auction for one of these silkscreen prints. There was also other art. They had all sorts of shows that, again, done under the provision of the Work Progress Administration. We turn to night, real quick look. The Court of the Seal at the California building on the left and San Francisco over to the right. And again, nighttime, all these lights were very carefully hidden. You don't see bare bulbs. You don't see anything protruding and taking you away from it. So in this one picture, you have submerged lights lighting up the fountains, but you have hidden spotlights illuminating the Rainbow Girl at the top, and other lights that are shining on the temple compound, but none of them conflict, and you never really see the light fixtures. It's all very, very carefully done and coordinated. The only spot, again, you saw bright lights, neon stuff was at the gateway, so you had big lights trying to get you to come in, see the Chinese village, go for a ride on the Ferris wheel, go see the roller coaster. You know, very, very well coordinated. And of course, in the gateway, they wanted you to come in and see all the nudist shows or come on and get some caramel corn or a piece of pie. Well, the fair ended, and as we will in just a moment, the planned airport never came to be. The Navy moved in and took over Treasure Island as a major naval training and most importantly, hospital facility for the Pacific Theater. So most of the fair buildings quickly torn down, major hospital facilities such as this one erected, become a very, very important part of the war effort for the Western coast. Over time, most of the other pavilions got knocked down. You can see, again, on the left side, the hangars have survived, the administration buildings up there, but most of the Navy buildings from the war have started coming down. The ship that's docked there was a training ship for folks to get familiar on how to do damage control on ships, excuse me, that sort of thing. Guy that's on one of our World's Fair boards, Ralph Quinn, was stationed out here in the 1950s to go to a naval radar school. And he was kind of amazed to come out and find this fountains and these statues out there. The statues had originally been at the Fountain of the Western Waters. The fountain was originally inside the Pacific House, and the Navy, for whatever reason, saved the fountain, moved it over here, and put these statues around it. So Ralph said it was a sort of surreal experience to come out and wander around, and you're in a Navy base, and there's all these, you know, olive drab Navy trucks or gray trucks running around, sailors everywhere, and then you could go out and go for a ride on the Llama. The Navy then basically moved out over time, but the airport never came to be. But we did get to see it as an airport in sort of a way. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy goes off in a search of the famous treasure. They decided they had to have a Pan Am flying boat, and unfortunately, there were none of them left in the world at the time. So they got another boat that was not seaworthy, brought it up to the island, and on the top, you can see what it looked like if you were there in person, and then down below, through the magic of matte paintings and special effects, we can see them getting ready to take their cruise. He came back here in Indiana Jones, and this is the one with Sean Connery, the whatever the name was, escaping me, Senior Moment. This was interesting, though, because it was still a Navy base at the time, and they could not put the Nazi symbols up on it. So they went off and did the live action filming, but they had to add the Nazi symbols and the control tower. They took off the smaller one that was there in actuality and put up a much larger one to go up there and recreate it. And then Disney ended up coming back here. If you ended up seeing the remake of The Parent Trap, and they get to their hotel in San Francisco, it's actually the former administration building with an awning, some flags thrown up, and it passes very convincingly for a hotel, doesn't it? And the building's still here today. That's Carol walking up to the front as we were on a recent visit. Again, always planned to be an airport terminal. Looks like an airport terminal. And what's great is some of the statues did survive. They have a number of them on display outside the museum. Some of them are still in storage, waiting to be redone, along with that fountain. But you can come by and see the works out there, little plaques telling you what they are. There's a museum, which unfortunately is closed right now. COVID is taking its toll on a number of other things, but hopefully they'll be back in business soon. Collection of artifacts from the fair and periodic speeches and talks about that. And maybe when we get to the Q&A, Anne can talk more about what the museum does and is up to. And you can still go around the island. This, again, was built as a hangar. This is the same building that the Pan Am Clippers was at earlier. And the spirit of aeronautic transportation, or I'm sure I got the name wrong there, but she's a little worse for the wear, but you figure she's been out in the San Francisco weather for 80 plus years right now. So she's doing better than most of us would look after 80 years. And there's a small marker out there reminding everybody about the year that the Navy was out there and all the things they had done before they turned it back. The island's still out there. They're still debating about what to do with different pieces of it. Then a super fun cleanup of part of it. There are some nice new buildings out there. Hopefully they're going to do something to stabilize it, because being landfill, it does sink a bit every year, but it's still very nice to go out. You can still go down the island, the Avenue of Palms, or Olives rather, and see where the olive trees are that they planted, and you can get a nice feeling. So if you're up in the San Francisco area, really do suggest you go out to the Naval Reserve Center, the World's Fair, Treasure Island, and go enjoy it. And again, that's the look at it. I just finished the book at 6 o'clock or a little before last night, so hopefully I kept most of it in mind. Again, for folks that are new, my website, worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom, has the schedule for each talk. We have to figure out what we're going to do next week in a moment. But let me stop sharing here. And let's see, questions. Let me try to go through here. Okay. They're architectural critics, hence the problem. Yeah, it's so many people. It's easier to criticize, not as easy to do. Where can one see the figures from the fair? Anything else survived? I mentioned some of that. That was some of them are out there in front of the museum. There's some at the Presidio, not the Presidio. The Golden Gate Park has one. The Capitol Park in Sacramento has one. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, Anne was mentioning pieces of the fountain still exist in storage at the Treasure Island. If you have a few million to share it, we can get it restored. Okay, everybody has $1 million. Put up the hand. Well, hopefully we can get it done. Let's see. Okay, so let me, if anybody has a question, again, I'll try to keep the Zoom bombers at bay. Have a question, there's a feature you can put up your hand and let me know that you want to talk, or you can wave and I'll unmute you and see where we go from there. So comments. Okay, Irv, let's see. So if we go to Irv, I can ask to unmute, and you should be, I think you can unmute yourself now. There you
There
are.
you go. I was
Okay.
wondering if they made that island out of artificial soil, brought in silt and dredgings, how is the soil rich enough to support all the beautiful plantings out there?
By the book. No, I do mention it. They actually went through quite a thing. They brought up all the soil, dredged it up there, and then they went through a de-leaching process to get as much of the soil out. They had a lot of water that was poured from the mainland to take the soil and bring it back out. But they also brought in a tremendous amount of topsoil, and they also did chemical conditioning of the facility, the area to try to leach that out. It was also not accidental that things like the plants in the picture behind me are put where they were, because some of those plants grow better in a saltier type of soil. So when you had a big, large, natural expanse of dirt, you could grow things like that were salt tolerant out there. Others were in planters or things that were, they were able to, like when they brought a tree in, bring the dirt that was around the tree, bring it in and plant it out there. But they worked on it for about 3 years to get the plants and everything ready for it, and to treat the soil to make it suitable for it.
Yeah, that's probably not much different than what they did in New York, because that was a former ash dump.
Yeah,
So soil was non-existent there too.
yeah, but the soil in New York was all soil they brought in from excavations of land. They didn't go and have sea bottom dumped there. So the folks that built Treasure Island were some pretty smart cookies. They knew right away from day one that sea soil was also going to be an issue for buildings or anything else built on it. So they had a very extensive desalting program from the day the thing was built.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Who else? Okay, Baron, let me come over here. I am asking you to unmute. There you go.
There we go. I was looking on Google Maps. Obviously, the tower is long gone. I'm presuming, was it one of the first buildings to go, since the architectural critics didn't like it? Or what was the status of it, and why did it not stay, even though it was unofficially the symbol of the fair?
I don't know what order things came down. I do have some pictures of demolition, some sad ones, for example, Pacifica coming down, the Japanese building being burned. But the tower came down because it was in the way of the Navy base. Again, the Navy base was the only consideration. What's actually interesting is after one of the more recent earthquakes up there, people went out to the island, and you could see where the steel supports were for the tower, because they, again, had to anchor this thing into the ground. Well, the ground settled in the earthquake, and all of a sudden you could see where they had torched it off right at the ground, the supports of it. Excuse me. I don't know if they cut the tower down, toppled it down. I don't know. Maybe if Anne unmutes herself, she can tell us more about that particular piece. But yeah, it was destroyed because it was in the way of the Navy base.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. And yeah, Anne is mentioning you can still see the octagonal footprint. Yeah, pipeline brings water from San Francisco to the island, and there's a huge holding tank on Yerba Buena Island. Again, I didn't use all the pictures in the book that I used today, but they did build a huge water line. They also had to do all sorts of other things that you just don't think about. They had to build electrical lines. They had to build gas lines. I mean, everything out to that island. Some of it came under the bridge. Others was just put across the bay. So just the electrical lines. Like I mentioned in the book, the very first night of the fair, everybody's having a great time, and all of a sudden the lights blew out in the gateway. Used up more electricity than they had first planned. So there's talk in the papers all the next day about how people were up there and they had to wheel the people down by hand and that, and how they rushed in another emergency cable, and they were very proud they never had another power outage like that. But again, they had to build everything from scratch. Every toilet that flushed, all had to go someplace, and there was nothing out there when they started. So a massive, massive job. And I'm sorry about having everybody on mute and making you have to raise your hand. I just don't want to go through a repeat of last week's silliness. Well, Anne, you can unmute yourself. Let me see if I can do this here. I'm clicking the, okay. Anne, are you there?
I'm there.
Okay, great. Okay.
And
Anne and I have corresponded a lot, but we've never actually spoken like this. So
Okay.
I hope you didn't catch too many mistakes, or you'll send them to me in private.
I have notes.
Okay, thank you. Please.
What I'd mostly like to do is let everybody know. I appreciate you mentioning the Treasure Island Museum and many other things about it. I just like everybody to know you can go to our website, treasureislandmuseum.org. We are, like many museums, currently hampered by the pandemic, but we do have an online lecture series, monthly lecture series, and all of the topics have to do somehow with the history of Treasure Island. And if I'm the one who's recruited the speakers, they're about the World's Fair. So I hope you will check us out. And we have, usually our lectures are on about the same time as Bill's on the last weekend of the month.
Great, thanks. Yeah, again, real sorry the museum's closed, and hopefully sooner rather than later you'll be back in fine form again.
I hope so.
Great. Who else? Okay, Randy. Okay. Whoops. Muted you twice here. Hang on a second. Come on. I'm clicking it, asking Randy to unmute. There you go.
You get it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Regarding the tower being torn down, I've mentioned to you, Bill, that my parents were raised in the area. I'm going to kind of go off on a sidetrack here. My mom went several times. She went on school field trips. She also had an aunt and uncle who lived in the city, so she would stay with them for a week or two during the summer and go to the fair with her sister. So she made several visits. My dad never went. My grandmother had read about the girly shows on the Gateway, but she assumed that the entire island was one big girly show. So she never allowed any of the 8 kids to go. So they missed that. But regarding the tower, my dad had told me when I was growing up that the tower went very early, and maybe Ann can answer this, went very early because when they decided to do the naval base, they did not want, whatever, 500 or however tall it was, foot tower being a beacon for any potential, aerial attack or whatever. So my dad always said it went first, and he said that was the reason. That's just kind of, family lore. I don't know if Ann might know more about that or not.
And any thoughts on the tower coming down? Believe you're still unmuted. Well, maybe we've lost her, and hopefully she'll come back. Yeah, I guess it could make sense to tear it down. Although I would think if you're on the only man-made island sitting in the middle of the bay, they could probably find you anyway. But yeah, it's again a 400-foot tower, so maybe it would stick up out of the San Francisco fog and make it easier to find. Anyone else? Oh, Jason. Okay, 1 second. Asked to unmute. There you go.
All right. Bill, I had 2 questions. Number one, you had talked about the plaster being easier for the artist to work with. And then you later on talked about how one of the artists made one sculpture or 2 sculptures and they turned it into 4. I wondered how much of the plaster artwork was carved versus molded and or cast. And my second question was, I saw the photo of the section of the cable from the Golden Gate Bridge. I got a picture of myself about 30 years ago standing in front of a very similar display at Golden Gate Park. I was wondering if it might be the same one.
Yes, it is the same one. It's out at I think it's the south end of the bridge at the visitor center, and it's still over there today. It looks pretty much the same. Yeah, most of the plaster stuff, a lot of it was cast. What they did was they built the artist would do a maquette of what they wanted to do, and then other people, in some cases, he would turn over them to do the molding and that sort of stuff. Then he'd come back and do the finishing work. Because again, they were doing an awful lot of work in a real short period of time. Ann was looking, she said she's trying to find a book on the demolition of the buildings, so she's trying to find it. So yeah, a lot of these pieces were actually, the small one would be like 18 inches tall, and then they would do it on a 12-to-1, make an 18-foot tall statue. Other people would do the execution, and there are pictures on various sites of artists supervising their work. And in some cases, like the big one that the 3 sisters did, there's no way the 3 sisters could do all that work and they had assistants that would help. I'm carving this, you go paint that, I'm doing this. So a lot of times the artists actually had assistants that helped, execute some of it. And that's part of why some of the artists didn't really care if they wanted to get some of their pieces back, because, they still had the maquette or the artist model, the thing that they had done that they had put their own hands on. And besides, even if somebody gave it back to you, an 18-foot statue, hey, Jason, here's your statue back, where would you as the average person be able to keep it? So yeah, like Ann's mentioned, the sisters offered the peacemakers. What would we do with it? Build a house? I mean, this thing was massive. It was, 100-something feet long, a huge thing made out of masonite. So what do you do with it? Where do you keep it? In retrospect, think about how many museums would love to get this stuff now, but back at that point in time, it was disposable. It was temporary art, and it wasn't, again, the art critics didn't view this as anything big because plaster is not exciting. It was bronze, but it's actually interesting. Maybe Ann knows. I was talking to my wife. Some of the pieces go to the fair, like the Girl and the Penguins. I've not been able to find out what happened to the Girl and the Penguins after the fair. So there's all this talk about, the widow loaning the piece to the fair, and then it just disappears. It's got to be in somebody's collection. Somebody's got to have it. Or maybe, as one person said, maybe somebody got desperate for money at one point and sold it off and it was melted down. But it's very, very I don't know, it's very sad that some of these pieces are so beautiful and maybe they're sitting in somebody's garage. Like even the one piece that was mentioned earlier, had been at the 1915 Expo. They were cleaning up one of the ruins of the 15 Expo buildings, and they found the statue had been sitting there for 20 years. And then they, how do you miss a big statue sitting there for 20 years? They took it out, restored it, put it on display at the GGIE. But yeah, so many of this stuff just vanished in the phrase to tear it down. I mean, they tore this entire thing down, in about 3 months' time. I mean, they were just really, faster than fast to rip this stuff out of there because the Navy wanted it, as a Navy base today. Even before the Navy base days, when you built you had a contract to put your exhibit in, they were only giving you 3 months to tear it down to ground level. The entire fair was going to be torn down in 3 months. It wasn't time to save a lot of stuff. So it's, well, you're saying, a lot of stuff that was just dumped in the bay, they took their time and reused lots of they reused a lot of the buildings, especially the exhibit halls. They were there until they burned down in a later fire. I'm talking about the artwork and the fountains and places like that. They just got those out of there fairly quickly. Anyone else? Well, for next week, I have not yet decided on a topic. Anybody have particular suggestions they'd like to make? You can either raise your hand or put it into the chat box. Randy, I think you're still unmuted.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you've mentioned Expo 70 as a possible future topic. I attended that, so I'd be interested in.
Yeah. Now, do you have a good collection of photos from Expo 70 yourself, Randy?
I actually do not.
Okay.
I made the mistake, and you helped me restore one of them. I remember a few years ago I sent you one. I think it was at the amusement zone or something. And you ran it through your Cool Scan. I made the mistake of buying those, and of course they're all magenta now. I have a handful of personal pictures that are actually on the Expo 70 Facebook page that I help moderate, but not a lot. So
yeah, I have a fair number. I have to see how far along some of them in the restoration process. So, but yeah, you and I chat offline because maybe you went to it. I was not at Expo 70. I do have a large number of pictures from it, but I was a starving college student in 1970. So I did not get to it. In 1 second, Dave. So let you and I talk offline. Maybe we can tag team about doing something where I show the pictures and you tell us what you saw when you were there.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
And then Anne asked about New Orleans. Yeah, that was about a month ago. So sorry you missed that one.
Okay.
It is online. I did put each of these things online. If you go to my website and you can see any of the past ones. Dave?
I think it would be interesting. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting for you to talk about the opening of Epcot Center. And having been there, what struck me, having worked on the original park and then Space Mountain and Pirates earlier, was just how amazing it was that that was the second gate, if you will. It was the first, second, as far as I know, the first second gate that Disney did in Orlando or anywhere. And so the planning to get people there, the fact that there was other things going on at the time, and then of course then later came MGM Studio Tour and several other third, fourth, fifth gate kind of things in the Orlando area. So I think it's now when people go to Walt Disney World, Epcot Center, as far as I know, is like right up near the top of the list. Spend some time at the Magic Kingdom as well as Epcot, and Disney's done a amazing job, I think, of kind of laying that out as well. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's all of the other parks to see.
Great. I got that. I also had from last week's suggestion about trains I'm working on. Let me get Joey here. Joey, unmute. What actually I'm trying to do in Epcot is I'm trying to get Debbie and her husband to go and he has so many better pictures than I do, but they're not here this week, so I can't. Maybe that's all. Just vote that they do it next week, and I'll tell them later. So Joey, what do you have?
Can you hear me okay, Bill?
Yes, we can.
Yes. What about, Bill, what about Coney Island? The history of Coney Island?
I don't have enough on Coney Island to do it justice, Joey. Again, if anybody does, I'm absolutely thrilled, willing, and happy to turn this over to a guest host any particular week. So if you have a bunch of Coney Island stuff, when I went to Coney Island, I went to go to the beach or I went to get a hot dog. I have some pictures of, the roller coasters and stuff in the 40s and 50s. And, I guess I go back to Luna Park and a few of them. My grandfather was actually there for one of the major fires. And, when I go and do Coney Island's real interesting to me because you do a genealogical search. The first story I think I can find about he was a brand new fire lieutenant, was out at one of the fires. I think it was Luna Park. It might've been one of the other ones. And, the roller coaster and everything collapsed and buried him and his men on their fire truck. And he was in the hospital for about a week until he got out, but he got an award for taking care of his men and stuff. So, so every time I think about Coney Island, I just think about my grandfather.
That's a fabulous story.
Yeah, the roller coaster falling on him. But again, if you have, or if you know other people online or back in New York that would like to do Coney Island, it would be one I'd be fascinated to learn more about myself.
Okay. Thanks, Bill.
Sure. Dave? Oh, you think you muted yourself, Dave. Here, I need to unmute again. There you go. Yeah.
So Pacific Ocean Park and the Santa Monica Pier, there's an area that, there's been books done, Ralph Story's things about those things that aren't here anymore. But perhaps you've talked about that before. I don't think so.
We did a little bit when I did the talk on things from Southern California that aren't here anymore, the Bernheimer Museum and that sort of stuff. On one of these things, what I've tried to do for each of these talks is take pictures out of my own collection that people can't see by just going and doing a Google search. So I could do something on Coney Island. I could do something on just about anything. If I did a search, pulled out other people's pictures, but I try to make it some extra entertainment value to seeing things that you can't just see by doing a Google search.
Well, they've been great. The one today was just excellent. I love the picture that you have, the aerial view, where you can see the Golden Gate Bridge being built in the background. What an amazing photo. That's like, I'm ready. Is there any way I can get a preview copy of your book? Because I'm going to buy it when it comes out, that's for sure.
It's actually interesting. One of the things I did when I bought the pictures to use for the book, I got a lot of pictures of vintage San Francisco that went back to the 1930s, 33 area, and including pictures of the bridges being built. And I didn't put them in this particular book, but there's pictures of the bridge, which just, sections of it hanging down and others that are not there. So I've got to get around to restoring them at some point in time. But, and the same fellow made a trip down to LA. So you get early pictures, the earliest 20th Century Fox studios and, some of the other stuff. So I've got to get to those. But it's, the the bridge and all that sort of stuff, some of it is fascinating. There was another, you were asking about bridge, and there was something else that I was thinking about. Yeah, the book, hopefully, I finished writing it last night, sending it to the publisher. Then we go through the editing process. When Anne sends me the list of all the horrible mistakes she caught today, I'll fix
I
it.
did not. Just comments.
No, whatever mistakes you made, we'll fix it. Randy has been helping me with the proofreading. My wife, Carol, knows she does a wonderful job. You know what happens? You write this book over 9 months, and you try to move this picture here and move this picture there, and you realize you started 2 captions that both say, when artist Dave English did the following, Dave English, who did the following, you got to go back and rephrase it, move it around. So Carol helps me tremendously with that. She also knows that I like to throw commas into strange places, that sort of thing. So Randy's been helping the same thing. Carol has read it. Randy's been reading it. Anne's got a copy of it, and we're going to go through the editing thing. They're hoping to have it out at Christmas. They always hope to have them out at Christmas. They always get them out the week after. It come out whenever it comes out. But yeah, I was really thrilled to be able to do this, because when I first started reading about this fair, and when I got the first set of pictures, the one behind me is one of the first that I restored. I was just blown away by the gardens of it. I would have loved to have done this book in color because the really calls out for it. But unfortunately, I did not have enough color shots to do the entire thing. So I had to take a bunch of my color shots, turn them into black and white. But as I mentioned in the book, back then, a color photo was costing somebody about $5 in today's money, which you start, we all think about it. We take our cell phone, take a couple hundred pictures, it was free. Back then, if you were taking 30 pictures in a roll at $5 a piece, that was an expensive proposition. So I have many, many more black and white pictures than color. And most of my color pictures, for whatever reason, are night shots. I mean, the fair was just beautiful at night, and I will stick more of them on my website now that I've restored them. And the nighttime shots are just awe-inspiring. I mean, the soft infusion of the lights, and I really would have killed to have gone for a night visit there. So for next week, yeah. Also, how many people would be interested in seeing pictures of Carlos Keeby as a Boy Scout? Watching Carlos's look on his face. Carlos and I both worked at the same Boy Scout camp together. So I got many, many rides on Carlos' brand new Camaro back from the Catskills on the Long Island. So, or maybe it was a Firebird.
I was wondering, does the BART train make a stop in Treasure Island?
Does what?
Does the BART train have a station in Treasure Island?
No, but the Muni does. The San Francisco Bus Company goes to Treasure Island. Lots of people live there now.
Yeah, it's got some nice facilities out there, and starting to look better. It's so strange, as you might hopefully agree, Ann, that you see this brilliant modern looking building, and then some Navy building that's got some old paint peeling off, and it's just a real dichotomy of stuff.
Yeah, well, I understand there are lots of the closed bases look sort of the same way Treasure Island does. Of course, yeah. Missing old exhibition buildings, of course.
Yeah. No, I've been a lot of old Army, Navy, Air Force bases over the years, and they all have a definite GI look, government issued look to them. So
yeah.
For next week, Don, you could unmute yourself, Don. You got the power.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you, so I was waiting to really
okay.
quickly. Had an idea. You have a lot of pictures of the Disney Studios in Burbank. It'd be interesting to get a history of that. I mean, I've been on the lot exactly one time, but I would love to know the history of it. I've got the one book on the subject, and that's about it. Okay,
I'll make a picture of that. You can see many, many pictures of me and Carol all standing at the Mickey Avenue sign, because every time we go back, I have to get a picture of Mickey Avenue.
And I still owe you an outline. I apologize. This last week got a little hectic for me, but I still plan to send you an outline on Route 66 stuff.
No problem. Did Carol wake you up to tell you had a disaster at your house too?
Pardon? No.
No, this week again. Oh, the plumbing's gone. This gone. That's gone. How many people would be interested in a look back at Universal Studios in the 60s, 50s, 60s? Okay.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, well, I'll plan on doing that for next week, and then I'll see about getting some of the other stuff. And again, if there's, it doesn't need to be one of the parks that I know anything about. again, if you live somewhere near, a great amusement park, like there was one, Bertrand's Island on Lake Hopatcon. I went to it a lot as a kid. I don't think I have any pictures. I've got movies of us at Bertrand Island, but if somebody knew anything about Bertrand Island, I'd like to talk about their park, or, any other theme park and, that sort of thing. I think folks would be interested in hearing about it. And then I get the week off, so that'd be just great. So I'll do Universal next week. I'll look into something about Epcot, still exploring trains. I've been so busy doing my, stuff. This week I didn't have time to go back and really coordinate some of it. Oh, Carl's just telling me he's glad I photoshopped a cigarette out of his hand in an OSR picture. Yeah, we were young. What do we know? I mean, I have to go and Photoshop beer bottles out of half the staff's hands, I think. Joey.
Bill, another great theme would be old movie locations around LA.
Yeah, there's actually a guy that does that on Facebook, and I'm in touch with him, and I'll see if I can get him to do it. He's done some incredible stuff, because you start taking it for granted. You drive down, like the ride I drove to the police station every day. It was the road where ET flies. They go on the bikes over the trees and stuff. Outside our house, if you go see the movie, the 40-Year-Old Virgin, the finale of the movie was, if I looked out the window, I could see it right now. So you get, it's just there. I mean, it's really funny. We live across from a very small park, which is next to a very large park, but they use our park for all sorts of stuff, and they haven't used it much lately. But I came home one day and there was a graveyard in the park. All these tombstones and street lights with Spanish moss hanging down. And, it's like, where the hell that? Oh, we're doing a movie here and we're shooting it tonight. Then one day I was out there, heard this giant helicopter, and they were bringing in this about a 40-foot hamburger. And it was like, the whole thing was, oh man, I need a burger. No, not that burger. I need a big burger. Well, how about this? And the helicopter lifts it up from behind the people. And all sorts of silliness. But this one guy has gone all around LA, and he's got the house, the stairs for the music box, with the Laurel and Hardy. I'll see if I can get him to do it. ET Park, I patrol ET Park a couple times a week, again, just all this sort of stuff. Excellent idea, Joey, particularly if I can get him to do it. So a great idea.
Great, Bill.
Well, appreciate folks. Joe, Baron, you had another question? Here, let's make sure you're unmuted. There you go. Hang on.
There we go.
There you go.
I want to say thanks, Dan, because I'm looking on my tablet here, and I did find the octagonal shape that shows where the tower used to be. My quick observation of it is there is just really, apart from the museum, which was the administration building, there really isn't any remnant of the fair left over on Treasure Island. It's really sad. Although, yes, it had other major uses over the years, and that makes sense. But whether this is ironic or symbolic or whatever it may be, but right now, currently sitting on that octagonal shape, which looks like poured over concrete, is a guard shack.
Yeah, that's, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, one of the main facilities on Treasure Island now is a Job Corps.
Yes, that's what it says, yes.
Yeah.
And it's a guard shack into the parking lot or something.
Well, it's kind of cool. They have it's one of the few Job Corps that has a fine dining training. So they have chefs in training there. So when you bring a tour, which I used to do, you could go and have lunch at the Job Corps. It's always kind of fun.
Good deal. Now, there's a question here I'll get to you in 1 second, Randy. There's a question, did Charlie Chan movie about Treasure Island show the exterior? No, I mentioned that in the book. Matter of fact, I just watched it to be 100% sure. Charlie Chan at Treasure Island. They have some stock footage of them flying over it, some background process shots, and then they supposedly go to the fair, but they go to the Hawaiian Village, which didn't exist, and this big nightclub and this Hall of Magic, which didn't exist. So Charlie Chan, Treasure Island, is just a fictional work of Hollywood magic. And Randy.
Yeah, you might be able to answer this, maybe Anne. Two questions. One was, somebody asked about the BART stop, and there is none. During the fair, I think, didn't the Muni trains run across the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, and was there a stop
No,
at Yerba Buena?
no. I always thought there was, but I looked into it and no. You had to take, if you were on the public transportation, you had to take a ferry.
Okay.
But you could take a ferry from either side of the bay.
Right. The other question I think is, Anne, when I was in the Cub Scouts, this would have been the early 60s, we did a tour of Treasure Island. And I remember them pointing out the artwork that Bill showed earlier with something that was from the theme building, that circular fountain, and then some statues around it. I remember that being pointed out to us. Is that still there?
So you must have gone to, it was the original Court of Pacifica, and there were 16 sculptures remaining from the Court of Pacifica, still in a circular pattern. So that's what you saw. But they had also, there was also a fountain, Bill talked about it, Fountain of the Pacific in Pacific House, and they moved that to the Court of Pacifica. So that was what you saw. You saw the Fountain of the Pacific and 16 sculptures. And what Bill also mentioned, 6 of those sculptures are now in front of Building 1.
So is that circular fountain still there?
All gone.
All gone. Okay.
Well, the fountain was broken up brutally into, it's a beautiful terracotta work of art. It was broken up into pieces, and it's now in storage with the remaining sculptures.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm asking anyone who has $1 million to send it our way. Stored.
I'll send you my profits from the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that will probably help restore the llama's nose. So.
Yeah, because people who publish books about World's Fairs only do it for the money, right?
Yeah, yeah. You know, when I first did my book on Disney TV, I sat down at one point and figured out how many hours I put into that, and then how much more money I could have made if I had worked at McDonald's. So,
yes,
you know, you obviously don't do this stuff for the money for it. But no, I am going to donate a portion of the profits from the book to the museum, because I really admire the tenacity these people have in, you know, saving it and keeping the legacy alive. So, you know, there's one more thing we can all do as a group. When it's open, I suggest everybody go for a visit.
Or go visit the website, because we have 4 online exhibits. And as I mentioned, we have our lecture series, which has some pretty wonderful stuff. And Bill, thank you. That's very, very generous of you to make a donation from the profits. I appreciate that.
No problem. I just wish more of it had been, you know, preserved. And I know you have so much more in storage that when Carol and I were up, the museum was closed for renovation, and was like, oh, you know, you feel like you're standing at the gates of the, you know, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You know, you're looking in, you can see stuff inside, and I was thinking, well, I do know how to pick locks, but well, you know, better not do that. So
well, it actually was a functioning museum. It occupied the entire 10,000 square foot concourse of that airport terminal, and we had a fabulous collection. I'm not going to talk about what happened to it. We don't have it anymore. It's all in, the collection's all in storage too.
Yeah.
Anyway, that it closed in 1997.
Well, hopefully back soon.
Hope so.
Well, thank everybody for joining. And everybody's just waving. Didn't know if Carlos had a question. Just waving. Okay, great. Appreciate everybody joining. Next week we will take a trip to Universal, the competitors. I worked there a number of years, so it'll be fun to go back and visit the old stomping ground. But I will send out the same thing as next week. If you're already on the mailing list, you'll get it directly via mail. If you're not on the mailing list, would like to be, just drop me a email. Otherwise, we'll be on worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom Saturday morning. And I'm glad we were able to keep the lunatics at bay this time. So they just didn't want Don Lancaster stomping on them. So
you know, thanks again, Bill. I really appreciate this.
Well, I appreciate everybody coming, and I hope everybody has a great weekend. For the folks that are near fires, the folks up north and everything, again, if we really think about you, we see the smoke outside. It's nowhere near as bad for us as others, and just hoping for the best. So thanks all.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, bye.
You.
Hey, bye-bye.